Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over WDS. So in our last video we touched on setting up DHCP and DNS, which are prerequisites for a lot of Microsoft's fundamental communication systems and platforms throughout anyone that runs like an Active Directory or Windows environment. And today I decided that instead of setting up all like the boring framework stuff, that we're going to do a piece on actual super exciting things. So if you're a Homelabber or a technician or anyone who's like computer savvy, either you worked on a PC for your parents or your friends, or you do it at work, but you're a tech or a help desk tech or something like that, chances are that you've probably reinstalled an operating system. Now, for anyone that isn't like in like the IT industry, pretty much USB is the way to go. It's the standard. And I know Microsoft, as well as others, have developed tools that will even make USB drives for you, so you don't even have to use the automated methods like, going into disk management and formatting it, etc., and copying the files to it. And they'll even make the drive for you using the ISO or whatever source files you have. And then, further removed from that are just the inquisitive people, the average Joes who really don't necessarily have a inkling for IT or even work in the industry, but are, do-it-yourselfers, and, they might even still be using DVDs. So, primarily the industry is run by people, not working in the industry, by USB drives, and anyone else is probably using a disk. And we all know that that's super slow, and while USB drives are infinitely faster, there are faster and even better ways to do it. One of those technologies, again, that I'm going to be covering today is WDS. And WDS is Windows Deployment Services. And Windows Deployment Services is a server technology that is used to deliver images using WIMs. And WIMs, in this case, are Microsoft's Windows imaging format. And they're like ISO, they are a package that contains all the files and stuff that, is your operating system, essentially. So we'll be covering how to stand up a WDS server and, importing some WIMs, and I'll be going over, a couple of the intricacies involving that. But, I just wanted to start off this video by explaining what it is and what's utilized. And as far as what's utilized, you're going to be experiencing what's called PXE. And the PXE, the pre-boot execution environment, most people, you might have heard it called PXE for shorthand. That's what I call it, PXE booting. PXE booting is a combination of TFTP and DHCP using the PXE standard. So machines without an operating system will boot off of their Ethernet controller, their NIC, and if their NIC supports PXE booting, the PXE protocol will load TFTP boot and DHCP. So it'll get an IP address from your network, and then it will ask where the TFTP server is. And WDS uses the TFTP technology, so that answer responds back, and you go from there. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I've already started up my server here, DC1, and we're just going to go ahead and log in. Like before, we're going to be installing it as a feature. So let's go ahead and open up our server manager here, and we'll head over to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Went a bit too quick there. Add Roles and Features. Role-based our server. Alright, so now let's scroll all the way down the list, and you'll see Windows Deployment Services. Check that box. We're going to have some prerequisites here. Hit Next. Next again. And then it's going to ask you, hey, I need to install deployment and transport servers. That's fine. And install. So thankfully, while this is a super cool feature, there isn't a lot to it. You know, the configuration can get kind of in depth depending on what you do. You can also, alongside WDS, use a technology called MDT, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, which will allow you to script things like what username to make and what serial key to use and what software to install. And we'll get into that later, but this is just a primer, you know, a basic setup and install Windows via the network. So now that we're done installing our role here, let's go to WDS Management. So we'll go to Tools, and we'll go to Windows Deployment Services and open it up. And here we go. Perfect. Beautiful. So what do we do? All right. So the first thing you're going to do is we're going to click on Servers here. And this is going to show our server, server DC1. As you can see, we have a little yellow exclamation point here because the server is not configured. So let's right-click on our server and hit Configure Server. And then we're going to go through our base configuration. This base configuration is pretty much going to set up the folders and the files needed for WDS to work. And before I get into that, I want to backtrack just a bit. When this sets up the files and folders that it wants, generally speaking, you're going to want it not on your your drive that you're using for your OS. You're going to want it on a separate disk or a separate array. You're not going to want it to interfere with your OS or any of the arrays or disks that like Active Directory is on. So just keep that in mind. In our case, we're not going to be doing that, and we're only going to be installing it on our C drive, but that is definitely not good practice, and I actually think it even warns us. So stepping back into it here, let's go through the wizard. We have DNS and DHCP already installed, which is good because those are prerequisites for this to function. We can select Integrate with Active Directory or Standalone Server. We don't have Active Directory set up now, so if we do this, it probably isn't going to work at all. So don't tear your hair out. There is a way to get it to function, but it's not worth the trouble. So we'll go ahead and hit Standalone Server. The good thing about having a standalone server is if we decide to install Active Directory later and stand that up, it isn't going to affect anything. So we're going to go ahead and hit Next. And again, right here, enter the path for the remote install folder. The remote install folder is going to contain all of like the necessary configurations, files, folders that WDS needs. At this point, you would generally hit Browse and pick any other drive to install it on. In this case, like I said, we're just going to install it to C. We'll hit Next, and there you go. Sure enough, the volume selected is also the Windows system volume. For best performance and data reliability, the remote installation folder should be stored on a separate volume and, where possible, on a separate disk. Do you want to continue? Yes. Perfect. Next, it has to configure DHCP. It has to set some DHCP options for us. That way, when DHCP responds to a PXE request, it lets the client, the machine that's requesting, know that it is a PXE server, or that it knows where the PXE server is, rather, and gives it that address. So we're going to leave both of these. If the Windows Deployment Services Configuration Wizard, this just tells you how to configure these boxes if need be. Let's read it out. Do not listen on DHCP and DHCP6 ports. Configure DHCP options for proxy DHCP. If a non-Microsoft DHCP server is running on this server, then check the first box and manually configure DHCP option 60. Blah, blah, blah. This all looks good. So we'll just hit Next for now. And then, how do you want machines to respond to this server when it finds out that it is PXE bootable? Now, the reason why it asks you this question is because in some large environments, schools or businesses, the machines boot off of the network. They don't have hard drives. Mostly for terminal machines or like cache machines up front. Those will generally boot off the network in some very large environments. And then otherwise, machines might come from the factory, or a user might have configured it to automatically boot off of the network as a first option. But system administrators might not want users to be able to access the Pixie server. You know, they don't want them to be able to format their machine and like ruin their weekends because the user accidentally formats their machine. So here you can tune who the server responds to and why. You can set it to not respond to any client computers, respond only to known client computers, or respond to all client computers known or unknown. You're going to want this one. The next is the subsection of this, and that's an option that can be enabled that require administrator approval for unknown computers. Basically what this means is that if you check this box, any machine that has a Pixie request come through needs to be approved in WDS. And you find that by expanding this tree. You'll be able to see pending Pixie devices or pending installations, and you'll be able to right click and hit approve on that machine. Now if this is a Homelab environment, you may not want to do this, so I generally do not do it, and we're going to leave this unchecked and just hit continue. However, I do want it to respond to all client computers known and unknown, because that means that, say, respond only to known client computers. That's a tie-in to Active Directory. It only responds to computers that it understands via like MAC address, things like that. I want it to respond to any computer. I want to be able to format any computer in my house on my network. So we'll hit next here. It's going to copy the files that it needs. And we got a little bit of an error. The service did not respond or start in a control. That's fine. We don't need to worry about that right now. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. In pending devices, it would show up right here that a machine was pending, and you would right click on it and hit approve to allow the machine to continue the Pixie boot environment. Now that we've actually installed the role and it's copied the files and we've gone through the initial wizard, now it's time to like more deeply customize this server, right? So before we start it and get to doing anything, we're going to right click on it here and we're going to go to properties. And when properties loads up, we're going to run through these tabs really quick, and we're going to configure this so that it matches what we want a bit better. Pretty much there's only two primary options that you're going to want to take note of. The rest is more like fine grain in tunes, like options that you would use if your environment was bigger, you had more specific requirements. But for the most part, we're not going to touch that, you know, in this particular series. All right, so moving on. The first of which is going to be under your boot tab, and basically what we are going to control is what the user has to do for a machine to try and boot off the network. We are going to select continue the Pixie boot unless the user presses the escape key. This means that if a machine boots off of the network card, it will automatically pull an image and load up the menus for Pixie. Otherwise, our options are always continue the Pixie boot, never continue the Pixie boot, or require authentication, i.e. hit F12 to say yes, I want to do it. But we are going to continue the Pixie boot, which is the same as always continue the Pixie boot, only we're going to give the users an option to stop it if there's a problem. So we're going to say continue the Pixie boot unless people press the escape key. We're going to do that for known and unknown clients. After that, we're going to hit apply. That's one. So the next is under your client tab, and it's going to be towards the bottom of your configuration window, and that is do not join the client to a domain after installation. We're going to check that box here because we're going to be under the assumption that we're just going to be doing vanilla installs of operating systems and not taking the machine and sucking it into our domain. So we'll check that box, and all the rest of them can be left for default as of now. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. You might get an error, that's fine. Just hit OK. OK. So now we can start the server. We'll attempt to start it here. Alright, now we have the little green play button saying that we're ready to go. So, how do we install Windows now? The next part, now that we have our server set up and installed, we need to give it something to give the client computers. So the thing that you need to know is that this process is split into two pieces. You have two different WIMs. Remember, WIMs are what we talked about. That's the the file format that Microsoft uses to push the images, the Windows imaging format. You need two of them, right? So what Pixie is going to do and what WDS is going to do, what Pixie wants is something that it can load into memory, right? And once it loads a file into memory, it's going to execute it, and that's going to give you the more advanced functionality, like being able to talk to your hard drive, etc., etc. This is called the boot.wim. The boot.wim is the smaller couple hundred meg file that gets pushed to the client computer, that the client computer then executes after it saves it to RAM, and that's when you can talk to the WDS server more and like start getting expanded functionality. So thankfully, and a lot of people don't realize this, but your Windows ISO pretty much comes with these already. Now in this example, we're going to be using the Microsoft Windows Enterprise ISO that we downloaded in a previous video, and I'll link that again for you if you don't know it. And we're going to go into the sources folder on the disk itself and take that boot.wim. So the important thing that you need to know about boot.wims is they come in two flavors, x86, 32-bit, and x64, 64-bit. Now, 32 and 64-bit WIMs matter when you're using UEFI computers and booting off of UEFI, or CSM computers booting off of CSM. CSM computers, or legacy boot, machines that don't have UEFI BIOSes, actually can boot either the 32-bit or 64-bit image, but UEFI computers only support the 64-bit boot.wim. So you're going to want both of them. Now in this particular case, I do believe that the Enterprise ISO only supports the 64-bit one, so that's what we're going to be using in our example, but it's good to know that and take that to heart. And in a later episode, we'll get to actually splitting the ISOs, or splitting the WIMs and extracting both the 32 and 64-bit. And I'll get to what I mean by that a little later in this episode, because you can actually split the boot.wims, and I'll show you what I mean. So first and foremost, we need to go get that ISO, and I just happen to have it. Let's see here. Ooh, or maybe I don't anymore. That's okay. How much space do I have left? 5.82 gigs? Oh no! No! Okay. That's a bit problematic, but no worries. Let's see. If we can copy that ISO from our host machine. Hopefully I have enough space. I think I do. I think this is set to expand, so we should be good. Please don't take forever. Six minutes. Okay. Well, we'll let that work that for a second, and we'll just kind of keep this over here where I can see it. All right. So I guess before we import the boot.images, we will go to install images. And what we're going to do in install images is to make it simpler on yourself. Just set this up at first. Just do it right the first time. We're going to right click here, and we're going to hit add image group. And we're going to call this one Windows. And inside of the Windows imaging group is where we're going to import all of our install.wims. And install.wims like boot.wim. Install.wim is also in the sources folder of your ISO. Now, it's important to note that for the enterprise evaluation that you can download from Microsoft, the install.wim is in .wim format. However, depending on how you download the ISO, like if you were to just go to Windows 10 download right now on, Google, and you download the ISO from Microsoft, it's your boot.wim is going to say boot.wim. You still have your boot.wim. but your install.wim is now going to be called an install.esd. And that actually needs to be decrypted to .wim. It is an encrypted file. It needs to be decrypted to .wim in order to be usable. WDS does not understand ISOs, and it does not understand ESD files. It understands WIMs. The good news is that it's really easy to decrypt them if you have the tool, and otherwise boot.wim, for example, is not only not generally in .esd format unless you get it from some weird source, but more importantly, going back to what I said about 32 and 64-bit boot.wims, you only need one copy. You don't have to have a boot.wim and a boot.wim for all the different versions of Windows. You actually only need the one. It is important to note, however, that while, say, a boot.wim from Windows 10 is loaded under boot images in WDS, it will not only support the operating system that you originally got it from, but it supports all previous operating systems. So say we extracted, which we're going to in a moment, we'll go ahead and do that now. Say we extracted our boot.wim from our Windows Enterprise ISO here. And then say we had a Windows 7 ISO or a Windows Vista ISO, and we copied that over and took the install.wim out of it. It would still work. It understands. They're backwards compatible. Forwards compatible? No. But backwards compatible? Yeah, sure. So, now that we have our ISO over, sorry about that wait, we're going to right-click on it and hit Mount. Once it mounts, it'll mount just like you would put a CD in it. And we're going to navigate over here to the Sources directory. And inside the Sources directory, I just want to show you, we will hit Install, IN. And right there you can see it, install.wim, 3.5 gigs. It's pretty much the entirety of this drive. It's the entirety of the OS is right there. And then we actually have boot somewhere in here as well, boot.wim, right there, 318 megs. So now that that's mounted, let's go back again to our boot images. We're going to do this one first, and we're going to add boot image. And now we're going to navigate to our mounted enterprise eval, go into the sources folder, and our boot.wim is right here. And as you can see, it automatically sorts by WIM, so you don't have to go through all the junk. We'll hit open, next, and it's going to read that WIM and give us what it says. The image name is Microsoft Windows Setup x64. We will leave that, but I'm going to tell it that it's called Windows Install. And for the description, I'll just leave that. Microsoft Windows Setup x64. That'll tell me that it's a 64-bit WIM. Alright, then we'll hit next. And next, and it's going to add it in for us. Perfect. There it is. Windows install. All good. Alright. So next up is we want to go inside of our Windows group that we just made, and we'll right click on this and hit add install image. We're going to browse to the same DVD, click on the install image, and we're going to import that. And just like the boot image, it'll tell us what it's trying to do. Windows 10 Enterprise Evaluation. See how it shows up in this little box? That's important to what I was foreshadowing earlier about options. So we'll get to that in a second. By default, use the default name and description for each of the selected images is checked. I don't want to do that. So we'll uncheck this, hit next, and it'll give us the ability to change it. I'm actually going to leave it the same, but if you did want to change it, that's how you would. You would simply uncheck that folder and hit next. Uncheck that box and hit next. So we'll go ahead and hit next, confirm, and adding. This moves along pretty quick. It generally isn't too much of a pain to pull in images. Oh no! Not enough space on the disk! Alright. Let's see what we got here. I obviously didn't think this through. Alright, yeah, so we're pretty low in space. Okay. That's okay. Let's see. Edit disk. We're actually going to attempt to expand this, and the way you do that is you just go over to Hyper-V and you edit your disk, right? And after we hit edit disk, we'll browse to the disk that we want to expand, server DC1. Expand. It might not let us because it's in use, but we'll give it a shot, and we're going to say 60 gigs for the new total size. Hit next and finish. Perfect. Now if we go into our server, we can right click and go to disk management really quick. And now we can extend the volume, all of the available space, do it. Good. Now we should be able to refresh, and now we're good. Alright, so that was like a mini lesson in a lesson. Whoops. Alright, so now we're going to add our install image. Sorry about that. Alright. We're getting close. Do it! Perfect. Successfully added. Alright, awesome. Now, we are actually going to go into our PC here, and we're going to unmount this here, eject, and we're going to delete it. Yes. And I want to show you what I was talking about. I actually brought over a WIM from another installation that I have, and I want to show you what Windows 8 and 10 have been doing that you may not know. That is that your license key matters for the edition that you want to install, but the ISO technically includes all of the editions that are available. So if we hit add install image, we're going to navigate to the one that I copied over earlier, the install64.wim, and we're going to hit next, and all of a sudden this screen matters a lot. As you can see, these are all the different versions of Windows that are actually included in that WIM. You have Workstation, Education, Pro, and then the N editions all the way down to Home. Now this can take a really long time, so I'm only going to add one of them, so I'm going to actually uncheck a bunch of these. I'll leave Pro enabled, we'll do Pro. And we're going to import just Pro, because I don't want you guys to sit here forever, that'd be really rude. And we're going to hit finish, and now we have two. So now I want to show you something cool. Let's go over back to Hyper-V, and we're going to hit create a new VM. Now, there is currently a bug where if you select a Generation 2 VM, it won't pixie boot. I think that's server 2019 related, or at least this build related. So I apologize for that. So we're going to be doing Gen 1. So we'll do a Gen 1 machine. 1024 megabytes is fine. Connected to LAN. 20 gigabytes. Install an operating system from a network-based installation server is going to be our option here. And we're going to hit next and then finish. Okay. So like all the other VMs, we're going to just run through it really quick. We're going to tell it I want 2 cores. Want a little bit more RAM, we'll do 2048, 2 gigs. Guest services, no checkpoints, thank you. No. Guest stop. Perfect. So we've just created a test VM that is bonded to our LAN that we currently do not have an OS installed to, and we told it that we wanted to do a network-based installation. So if we actually go back into settings and click on BIOS, our boot order is our network adapter, and we're going to connect to it now. And we're actually going to reboot our Pixie server for good measure here, so we'll right-click on it and hit restart. Good. And we'll go back to our VM and Pixie boot. As you can see, it's grabbing Dhcp, and then it's going to give us our server info. There you go, 1.5, server DC1. It's loading boot.wim. And you just saw me create this. You know, there's no OS. It's going to load to our boot.wim, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. After it loads boot.wim, it's going to give us various options as far as interacting with our OS installation. Sweet. Setup is starting. This is exciting. Look at this. Windows Deployment Services. Let's hit next. And let's see, what did we name this? Server DC1. Our user is administrator, and this is going to be the server password and username. And there you go. These are the two WIMs we imported. Our Windows 10 Enterprise Evaluation and Windows 10 Pro. But what if I wanted Pro to be at the top? What if I generally install, what if I have a bunch of them and I wanted them separated, or you know, in a certain order? How do you do that? You know, I actually have the answer, and we're going to segue away from this installation really quick while I show you how. So inside of your WDS management, we'll go to our Windows group, and we'll go to our machines. Our WIMs here, Enterprise and Pro, are what show up when we look at this list, right? Enterprise and Pro. If you right-click on them, however, we'll right-click on Pro here and go to Properties. Right here, Priority. We can actually change this priority. And the priority, and we'll make this 1, the priority actually changes where it shows up on the list when you Pixie boot. And we'll change this one to 2. So even though Enterprise is technically on top of Pro, the priority is 2. So what if we restart our Pixie server here, and we go back to our main machine and we restart it? We're just gonna restart it here. I'm just going to actually hit the reset button, and we Pixie boot again. This time with the priority changed. What's going to happen is that Pro is going to be on top and Enterprise is going to be at the bottom because I've modified the priority in which they should be shown. This is good when you are handling multiple WIMs or multiple different types of operating systems, like servers. You can have all your servers in like a certain priority group. You can have your Windows 7 all together in a certain priority group. And you can even modify them. So say I made my Windows 10 installation group, Home, Pro, and Enterprise, group 1000. I would make Home 1001 because I want that at the top, Pro 1002 because I want it under Home, and Enterprise 1003 because I want it under Pro, you know, third in line. But say I had a server WIM too, like I could Pixie install server, I would make that group 2000, and I would say 2001 for server standard, you know what I mean? So that would show up under the Windows 10 list. So you can use priority in a bunch of different ways to organize the listing of operating systems much easier. Alright, so we'll just do this again. Server DC1. Enter our password here. And there you go, pros at the top. So with that said, what we can do now is we can click on any one of them. We'll say Pro, and we'll hit Next. And there you go, there's our disk. We can select this. We could delete, we can make a new one. Everything that the basic installation includes from this point on. And we can hit Next. And now it's going to fly along. It's going to absolutely fly. And this is pretty much the same process that we went through when I showed you Pixie booting when we made our Windows 10 VM here. So I am actually going to go ahead and cancel this. Everything after this point is everything that you've seen before. Making a user account, making a password, etc. So I'll go ahead and turn that off. And I'm actually going to delete our test VM here, and don't forget that you actually need to clean up the VHDs. Alright, so there you have it. We have our boot and install.wims, and in this episode you have installed your WDS role, you've configured WDS frameworks, then you imported a boot image after you extracted it from an ISO, you created a Windows group, and then you imported your install.wim from that ISO. You also went through selecting various WIMs during import, changing the names, changing the descriptions, and you've even learned how to change the priority. That's a lot to cover in one session, so we're going to call it, quits here. But, I think this is a great move in the right direction. I hope it was exciting for you. I know that being able to do this is really exciting for me. So if you do happen to end up, having like a production server in your house, I hope that this comes in super useful. It's always great being able to wire in and boot. So there you have it. You now know how to install Windows from the network, from Ethernet. Have a good one. I'll leave all the links on PXE and WDS below so you can read further into them. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and throw them below. Have a good one.